In this presentation, we're going to consider the logic of appealing to authority, testimony, and unsound authority. I am the Amateur Logician from amateurlogician.com. Let's get started. When considering testimony and arguments from authority, we should step back for a moment. Note that learning is most often a leap of faith. What does this term faith mean here? Here the term is used in a technical sense as faith involves a trust in authorities or testimonial evidence. So natural faith is obviously indispensable for everyone, no matter how smart, because we must largely operate on it. This is how we learn about the world around us. It is how we learn, for example, history. As social animals, we depend upon the communities we belong to. It is how we learn about ourselves as well. It is by testimony that you know where and when you were born, for example. Moreover, scientists too depend upon the work of other scientists. It is entirely rational that they do so, not irrational. No one scientist can verify every single experiment. Now, it's true enough, an individual must learn how to navigate these waters of testimony, as supposedly good authorities can at times be bad, and some of the waters are filled with highly contradictory theories. And some areas of thought, especially outside of the so-called hard sciences, are filled with bad thinking. Consider political philosophy or political theories. There are many, many bad theories out there. So part of navigating well comes from developing skills in logic and critical thinking skills on your own. Yet our intellectual dependence will and must remain, that is for sure. So learning most often is a learning of faith. How do you first learn about mathematics? You take a leap of faith with your teacher. How do you learn about history? How do you learn about geography? How do you learn about grammar? And so forth. Now we can think about this diagram here. So we have a witness. The witness might have immediately witnessed something or might have heard about it through someone else. They give a testimony, we hear it, and then we assess it. So that is the basic idea here in terms of testimony. Let's continue. Given the importance of testimony and arguments from authority, if we reject all arguments from authority, from testimony, we really end up in radical skepticism. We couldn't even be sure or have probable belief that we were born at such and such place and time. Even so, we must avoid excessive credulity. Not every statement somebody utters is accurate. People are often mistaken in what they believe. They also don't invariably tell the truth. People can lie and mislead. They do so often, unfortunately. Though rational as human beings, all of us are fallible and sinful. And so-called authorities can be wrong or just corrupt. However, we must additionally avoid excessive incredulity. If we don't trust any testimony evidence whatsoever, then we have entered into radical skepticism. We then couldn't be sure when or where anybody was born. We couldn't trust if we could really communicate with anybody using a language like English, which of course we learned via others. So testimonial evidence is both useful and necessary in order to live a good life and to have knowledge, or to have views that are probably true. No one should reinvent the wheel. We really do require testimonial evidence, even when it comes to, let's say, mathematical truths. Yes, we can prove various mathematical truths, but we learn so much more by relying on the testimony of others. They can say, hey, I know how to prove this, now let me teach you, and then you can build on top of them, so to speak. So testimonial evidence really is useful and necessary in order to have a good life and to have some knowledge. Let's consider testimony more broadly than just thinking about authority more narrowly. Let's consider this example. An acquaintance of yours claims to have seen a UFO the other day. How should we evaluate this claim? So let's think about it. Well, first, we should judge the trustworthiness of this person. Is he usually honest? If he's not, then maybe we shouldn't trust this guy. Second, we should judge the person's character more broadly. Does he have a good memory, eyesight? Is he careful in making conclusions, and so forth? Third, are there any witnesses? Other things being equal, the greater the number of witnesses and the greater diversity among those witnesses, the likelihood goes up. Fourth, is there any other collaborating evidence? For example, does he have a picture or a video or something like this? So those are the types of questions we should ask. Now, in terms of the third point, while that may increase the likelihood that the original claim is true, I mean, to be sure, this might be totally unreasonable and may be unjust to demand a witness before you accept a particular testimony. But when it comes to a testimony of this nature, like seeing a UFO or saying, hey, I've seen an alien come out of a spaceship, well, it seems reasonable to say, well, I'm not sure if I believe you. I would only believe you if there were a lot of witnesses. That seems like a reasonable judgment. Moreover, we should consider once again that history depends upon testimony. How do we know about Julius Caesar? Well, obviously nobody alive presently ever saw him. The witness who first told you about Caesar is a immediate witness, as this person only first learnt of Caesar from another. Your teacher relied on history textbooks and other teachers. Writers during Caesar's time wrote about him, however. There's collaborating evidence. For example, there are busts, statues, and coins in his image. So we have good reason to think that he did in fact exist. But of course, you know about Julius Caesar via testimony. But we can also back up that testimony with collaborating evidence. So therefore, there's good reason to think that Julius Caesar in fact did exist. But if we rejected all arguments from testimony, all arguments from authority, then it seems like, could we really have probable belief that Julius Caesar existed? Well, maybe not. If we push the arguments in a radical direction to reject all testimony, all arguments from authority, then we're really entering into a position of doubting the existence of Caesar. And that seems very unreasonable and, so to speak, illogical in a certain sense, in a certain colloquial sense. Given that appealing to authority is not automatically fallacious, and that indeed many times we do rely on authority, when is an argument from authority a good argument? So let's think about this. So an argument from authority has it that so-and-so argues X, ergo you should believe in X. The great philosopher and theologian Thomas Aquinas famously claimed that an appeal to authority is the weakest form of argumentation. But still, he said it's not automatically fallacious, depending upon the authority who is appealed to and how he is appealed to. First off, the authority needs to be a legitimate authority. Expertise must be had by that identifiable person or group. And also, this expertise must be relevant and reliable. For example, if you appeal to Albert Einstein's opinion on a question about general relativity, he's a good person to turn to, right? So he's a legitimate authority, he has expertise, he's an identifiable person, and his expertise is relevant and reliable on the topic of general relativity. However, he's not a good authority on, say, theology. Einstein was a physicist, not a theologian. Now, Einstein would be a reliable source on most questions about general relativity, though note that not insofar as the question's answer is disputed by contemporary physicists. So there are limits on how much we can appeal to Einstein in the context of contemporary physics. Certain issues would require a physicist alive today. Now, saying that someone is a legitimate authority, in a general sense, might be just to say that this person has expertise over a certain topic. In other words, in a certain sense, this person has a natural authority over that topic and is thereby a legitimate authority. There are various caveats to consider, and here's a couple of warnings. Another limit is suggested by the talk about Albert Einstein. So maybe Albert Einstein thought X about general relativity, but contemporary physicists think Y. Well, as non-physicists, we probably should say, well, the contemporary physicists probably have it right, and Albert Einstein got it wrong. But what if they disagree today? If experts disagree with each other, clearly it would be bad. It would be a bad argument to just appeal to one of them. Consider political theorists. They notoriously disagree with each other. So we cannot settle a debate just by appealing to one person's authority. That would be a very bad idea, and pretty stupid, actually. Well, here's all these political theorists. They totally disagree with each other. They have totally different worldviews. But I'm going to cite this one guy. He says X, and by his authority, that proves X is correct. Well, that's obviously false. It's obviously fallacious, I should say. Moreover, such arguments from human authority are probable only. So it would be fallacious to cite an expert authority as a means to bring absolute certainty or a knockdown argument. They're probable only. They can be highly, highly probable, but they're not absolute. On the one hand, we don't want to take an overly skeptical position, but on the other hand, we don't want to say, well, all good arguments are made by authorities. That's obviously not the case. Finally, reliability is related to objectivity and disinterestedness. So consider a used car salesman. He might not be objective nor disinterested when selling you a car. So he's probably not a good source to rely entirely on. So in general, we just have to be critical and think critically about our sources. Is this person objective, disinterested? Is this person actually an expert on the topic at hand? And so on and so forth. So critically thinking about our sources will lead us to better reasoning. And once again, we can consider that example of buying a used car. Can I trust my used car salesman? An argument to the effect that this used car salesman said X about cars, ergo is probably true, clearly is not a very trustworthy argument, right? We have the argumentum ad verecundiam fallacy. That is an appeal to unqualified authority. So that suggests, what should I do? So I go searching for an authority. For example, I find a weekend talk radio host who talks about cars. I found out he is an authority. He's an identifiable person. He has expertise by fixing cars and keeping up to date on different types of cars. Additionally, maybe we have no reason to think he is not objective and disinterested when giving car advice on the radio. So he seems to pass the test for a good authority. It's not a knockdown argument to say, well, this radio guy said X, so it must be true, but it does lend itself to a high degree of probability. He passes the general test of being a good authority. At the same time, however, we can ask further questions to him or any authority whatsoever. When he argues X, is this consistent with other experts in his field? When he argues X, does he or can he back up his argument? These two questions are important, and we should always keep them in mind when we're appealing to an authority. So we must be critical when citing authorities. In a nutshell, then, the argumentum ad verecundiam fallacy cites a witness or authority who lacks sufficient credibility, but also note that someone might be more or less credible, but, for example, be cited dogmatically. And we'll see that with some of the next examples. All right, let's do some examples. Example A. I heard somewhere that a doctor said coffee is good for you. Well, the problem here, this doesn't give us an identifiable source, hence it's not very strong. How about this? Example B. Paul Krugman claims tax increases won't hurt the economy. Now, he is an economist, but experts disagree, hence his claim shouldn't be used in argument to justify tax increases. We need more argumentation there. Example C, Dawkins says that Aquinas' arguments are easy to disprove. Well, Richard Dawkins is an evolutionary biologist, not a philosopher. Aquinas is, hence he's not an expert to argue from. And in fact, Dawkins' arguments against Aquinas are pretty much all strawmen, frankly, if you look into and research that. Example D, Aquinas said X about angels, so it is guaranteed to be true. Well, it's true, Aquinas is an expert theologian. However, this argument is too dogmatic. An argument from human authority will not give us absolute certainty. Our final example, example E, most crooks agree that American police are unjust. Now, assuming that this is a statistically true statement, there is still little reason to think that crooks are reliable, so it doesn't seem like a good argument. This has been a basic, brief presentation of the logic of testimony and authority. I'm the Amateur Logician from amateurlogician.com. If you enjoy this type of material, you can get the newsletter at amateurlogician.com/newsletter. It's a way to stay up to date with me and perhaps get some exclusive offers as well. You can also follow me on Twitter, now known as X. I would appreciate that. Or you can follow me on Instagram. Until next time, be well.